EDX Decision 1, Critical Path Analysis 2, Scheduling, Constructing a Gantt or Cascade Chart. A Gantt chart, or it might be called a cascade chart, is a way of illustrating how activities can be scheduled on a timeline relative to each other. It summarises information on earliest start and finish times and float, as well as showing critical activities. A recap on float. Float is any spare time associated with an activity. The total float for an activity is the latest finish time, take away the earliest start time, take away its duration. Activities with zero float are critical activities, and every project has at least one critical path from beginning to end. So for example here, activity E has some float. The latest finish 18, take away the earliest start 4, take away the duration 13 equals 1. So E has 1 unit of float available. Where would E fit onto a timeline for this project? When we are putting non-critical activities onto a diagram, we assume that they start at the earliest available time. So here we would assume that E would start at 4. Its duration is 13, so E would last from 4 up to 17. We would label it, so it could start at 4 and then 13 later would be 17, but the latest it can finish is 18, so we would show that 1 unit of float using dotted lines from 17 to 18 at the end of the activity. So now we're going to have a go at creating the Gantt chart for this project. We already know which activities were critical. They were A, D and F. So the convention is to put those on first and put them together. So A would go from 0 to 6. Obviously no float because it's critical. D would go from 6 to 16. Again, it's critical, so no float. F would go from 16 to 20. Which is the duration. And sometimes these can be just gently highlighted to remind us they are critical. Next is B. B has no precedence, so can start at 0 and last for 4 units. So start at 0 and lasting for 4 units. There's B. But the latest B can finish is 5, so it has 1 unit of float, which we put at the end of B like that. C also has no precedence, so it can start at 0 and finish at 15. So starting at 0 and finishing at 15 is C. Clearly labelled. But the latest C can finish is actually 20. So it's got 5 units of float available if needed. Then we can look at E. E, the earliest E can start is at 4 and it lasts for 13. So E would start at 4, lasting for 13 would take us up to 17. There's E, but the latest E can finish is 18, so it has 1 unit of float. And then lastly we have activity G, which could start as early as 17 and last for 2. So start at 17 and would last for 2, so that would take us up to 19. So that's G. It could finish as late as 20, so it has 1 unit of float shown with a dotted line. So remember to place critical activities first in the diagram and place other activities as early as they can be allowed to start, and we show float for non-critical activities as short dotted lines where necessary. So there's a solution, nice and neat, as you might produce in an exam question. So here we have another interesting problem. We're going to construct a cascade chart for this activity network, and you may remember that this had 2 critical paths. So we need to show that nice and clearly. So A was critical. So A could start at 0 and last for 4. Obviously no float because it's critical. C was critical and went from 4 to 7. G was critical and went from 7 to 12. So that's G. But also F and H were critical and went from 7 to 12. F went from 7 to 10 and H from 10 to 12, and then from 12 to 21 we had critical activity J. So there's the critical ones too. We can see the 2 critical paths. B had no precedence, so could go from 0 to 6. However, B, as we can see from the diagram, could finish as late as 7, which gives it 1 unit of float. Now if we look at non-critical activity D, it could start as early as 4 and last for 7 units, so that would take us from 4 up to 11. However, if you look at D, it could finish as late as 13, so that would give us 2 units of float if necessary. E, look at activity E, has to start no earlier than 4 and last for 4 units, so that takes us from 4 to 8, but E could finish as late as 10, which would give us 2 units of float. And then activity I could start as early as 11 and last for 3 units, so that would go from 11 to 14, but I could finish as late as 16, so that would give us an extra 2 units of float. K could start as early as 14 and last for 5 units, so that would take us from 14 up to 19. That's K, but K could finish as late as 21, so that would give us 2 units of float for K. And lastly, L can start as early as 14 and last for 3 units, so it takes us from 14 to 17, but could finish as late as 21 as well, which would give us an extra 4 units of flexibility or float if necessary. And there we can see the critical activities altogether, showing both critical paths, the non-critical activities shown separately, and each one has clear float available. In the next session we'll be using these Gantt or cascade charts.